Okay, hey, we're live. It's Highlands to Islands. We had a little bit of a break from mid-December, but we're back with a show, with an extension of the series that we started back in December. They were calling Scotch versus the World. Certainly, it's not a competitive thing so much as my co-host, Cameron George, National Brand Ambassador for Ardbeg, and I spend a lot, i.e. all of our time, immersed in the world of single malt Scotch whiskey. Having said that, we are both have an acute understanding that there are fantastic and fascinating whiskeys being produced around the world, in very diverse countries around the world, by various diverse methodologies. So we started this Scotch versus the World series to look at them and to try to understand them through the lens, obviously, of what we do at Glenmorangie and what happens at Ardbeg, but through the lens of being whiskey enthusiasts ourselves. We are privileged and honored to be joined by Koray, Whiskey Monster. He's the West Coast Regional Brand Manager for a number of Indian whiskeys, including Amrit and Paul John. So we'll be talking.
Let me fix that. Only Paul John, but I can speak for there. Yeah. Sorry about that.
Oh, got it. Okay, so West Coast Regional Brand Manager for Paul John. So we're gonna focus on that, but we'd love to gain some further insights into the macro category of making whiskey in India, which is I've never been, but I can't imagine the logistical challenges associated just from a microclimate perspective, and so on and so forth. But it's such a distinct style of single malt, and it's such an iconic area of the world that I'm really thrilled to have you on. So thanks a lot for joining us and taking the time to chat with us.
Thank you very much, Dan, for having me. Cam, we miss you here in Auckland. Love to see you, man.
Good to see you, man. I miss you as well.
Thank you very much. Like as you said, this is a really vibrant part of the world, India, making whiskey, and I didn't know a lot when I wasn't working for the brand, and because I was mainly focused on Scottish brands, and after moving to the States, I got the understanding of American brands, and of course, everybody in the world had the Japanese understanding of things in the last years. But India fascinated me a lot, especially after starting working and really after visiting India. So that was like a really turning point of everything for me. And I'm glad to be here because there's a lot to talk about, the influence of different countries, different cultures, geography, and logistics issues, as you just told. And I'm glad to be here, and it will be fun since I know you, and I miss to drink. I miss to enjoy with you guys personally.
The last time I saw you, I believe, was at Whiskey Fest San Francisco in 2019. It was a pleasure hanging out with you there. But to your point, we on the education and advocacy side of this thing, we're used to seeing each other in person, and that hasn't happened for quite some time. So the technology here, it's great to see you, even though it's in 2 dimensions as opposed to 3. So your trip to India, I'm guessing that was your first trip to India when you went.
Yes.
And so as an adjunct, I'm wondering how I know that the production of whiskey in India, particularly the distillery where Paul John is created, was in the game making blended whiskeys in India since the late 90s. Is that right? And then eventually the Paul John brand was launched in order to focus on more of a sort of an artisanal single malt point of view. Why did single malt become a thing in India? Is there a connection in terms of the influence of Scottish whiskey? I mean, is it like the Scottish whiskey industry obviously informed a bit of what happened in Japan? How did Indian single malt evolve? Where did that come from?
We got to start from a general point of view. So we got to understand the market a little bit, because the market is totally different. And in India is the most whiskey selling country of the world as well, most whiskey consuming country of the world. And at the same time, it's like top 10 best selling whiskeys of the world. India has 7. That's weird. Top 4 whiskeys. With the new list, top 5 whiskeys of best selling whiskeys of the world are from India. And when we talk about that, it sounds weird because all those whiskeys are around $7 to $10 range, maybe $15 range at most. And if we were to bring those whiskeys to US or to Europe or to any other whiskey making countries, we cannot call them whiskeys. We can technically call them rums. So in different words, they are best-selling whiskeys of the world by not being whiskeys, and they're normally rums. So that brings us to questions. So why is it like that? Because India has a different drinking culture. They have been raised under the influence of Commonwealth, and at the same time, different European countries like France, like Portugal in our case. And when you look at it that way, so there is a distinctive impact of European culture and understanding of alcohol. So it brings us different culture about wine. It brings us different culture of brandy and vodka, because Russians are a lot in Goa. Then you can see the impact of whiskey, of course, at the very best. And we see a lot of bottles of, the ordinary blended whiskeys from Scotland that we even don't know. Or we can see giants like Johnny Walker, which is Crowell, or other brands. And we can also see knockoffs. So you can see a wonderful square bottle looking exactly like Johnny Walker, but it has another name, like Long John. I'm just saying.
Sure.
So there are the knockoffs bottles. And this culture has been there forever. It's going to be there forever, because it actually is a more wonderful drive for the industry at that part of the world.
Mm-hmm.
However, following the rest of the world, after 1960s, when the Scotch single malt started to get marketed outside in the world, of course it raised some questions in India. And the first maker of the single malt in India was Amrut.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the first distillery that started making single malt, but they also have other whiskeys, like I told before. They also have high volume selling whiskeys. And it happened like 25 years ago. Then Paul John followed it. And Paul John, just to show the bottle, Paul John started it after their high volume whiskeys and rums and brandies. So Paul John is the maker of number 5 best selling whiskey of the world, which is the original choice.
Okay.
And then Rampur joined it. But this came from, the trend of the single malt whiskey, the rising trend of the single malt whiskey, the consumers, of course, because there are a lot of expats working in India. They cannot achieve good whiskeys over there, but they want it. So they either have to import it, which is also really expensive. Importing whiskey and selling in the local market in India is very expensive. If you import a bottle of Jim Beam and try to buy it in India, it's like 5-6 times the US. So Jim Beam wine being like $90, you don't want that, right?
Holy cow! Is that national or local taxation? Is that import duties?
India is quite like US, so every other state has different rules. This is like general rule of thumb, I can say, taxation. And there are states that alcohol is prohibited. And there are states that you cannot import alcohol which has more than 50% ABV.
Okay.
There are different rules that you don't want to mess around. But yeah, importing alcohol is expensive. So, and Indian producers are also ambitious. They also want their country to excel in certain things. And in our case, Mr. Paul John wanted to have a single malt made in India with all Indian qualities, and he wanted something really high-end. And he actually loves a lot of Scottish brands, including Glenmorangie. And he wanted to have something close to that Scottish line with all the Indian footprints that he can bring into the game. And that's how it was born. And most of the distilleries are trying the same thing. So they want to have the Indian heritage on it. And
So
Paul John, sorry about that.
No, and I was just going to say, so the distillery where Paul John is distilled, I'm guessing that there's, in order to support the kind of gallonage output required to create brands like Officer's Choice and so on and so forth, there's probably some sort of larger column distillery in the workings, in addition to the pot still distillery that produces Paul John. Do I have that right?
Yes. So in case of Paul John, we have 2 different sites that we make the whiskey. We have a site in Bangalore, which makes our higher volume whiskeys. Paul John is different. Paul John is located in the southwest of India, in the state of Goa, which used to be a Portuguese colony until 1964. So it has a lot of impact from Portugal, and also, Commonwealth is a huge impact on the country too. So we had a lot of wonderful news. Being a Portuguese colony also brought us to have a Catholic background, because the main religion is still Christianity. And that's also reflected in our whiskeys. First of all, name. Paul John is not an Indian name. It's named after a Catholic name. And, Mr. Paul John comes from there. Our master distiller, Michael de Souza, has the name Michael, and his last name is coming from Portuguese background, de Souza. And we also have Christmas edition whiskeys, which are really interesting. And like having Christmas whiskey from India, that sounds weird first, then you tell the story, and it's an amazing story because they celebrate Christmas over there, and that's why we have it. So we are talking about a meeting point of different cultures when it comes to our kids.
Okay.
And the copper pot stills are landed they are in Goa. We have different 2 sets of copper pot still. Interesting story is our copper pot stills are made in a state, handmade from Indian artists with respect to our designs. However, the state cannot sell or cannot create any alcohol. It's a dry state.
Koray, something that I absolutely love to hear you speak about is the global influences that have come together to influence specifically the Paul John distillery, which is a great representation of the terroir of Goa and the ingenuity that it takes to breathe into life a distillery that makes a style of whiskey, single malt, that may not always have been incredibly popular in the region. So what would you say in terms of homage, where are some of the other influences coming from? Like if you had to specifically pull out distilleries in Scotland or other countries that are of notable influence on the style of how Paul John Distillery, the site with the 4 stills was constructed.
So actually, we play a lot with our style. In general, our main whiskey is, I don't know if you can see that green bottle classic, which we call Goa in a bottle because it has tropical, full of tropical nuances and flavors. Then you get the spices and everything into it. Well, one of the things that a lot of people are excited about when they first try Indian whiskey, they also think they don't say it out loud, but they think that the whiskey can smell as masala, like masala, tikka masala, or whatever. So that's like a fair game. But when our whiskey is concerned, we tried, as I told before, all the Indian footprint in there concerning the general culture of whiskey. So when we started the whiskey, we wanted to have barley, malted barley, nothing else, 100% of that. And that brings us the general Scottish way. So we do everything, all the production levels in the Scottish way of doing. I can say you that we generally follow the SWA rules while making whiskey. So that will bring us a main style coming from Scotland. At the same time, we designed our copper pot stills in a smaller design, that will give us a lot of robustness coming from the stills. However, we wanted to change things a little bit to the Indian way. So instead of using the traditional 2-row barley, we use 6-row barley. 6-row barley giving us more mouthfeel and a lot of tropical fruits and esters. Then we double stilled everything. We put them in the barrels. But one of the things that we actually did, and which is a homage to Scottish whiskey, is we brought Scotland to India. And the reason for that is we don't actually have usable peat bog for whiskey making in India. So we decided to bring the peat as a whole, by the way, not peated barley. We brought the peat to northern India to our malting agency, and they peat smoked it for us. But then we paid our homage to peated whiskey in Scotland by using 2 different peat styles, one coming from Highlands, Aberdeenshire, and one coming from Islay. So it's a pretty wonderful company to the show's name, Highlands to Islands. And we bring Highland peat, we bring Islay peat, and we peat smoke our whiskey. So that's one of the things that we are doing at Paul John. And honestly, there are a lot of different distilleries that are that started to do right now. Let's say Japan also is joining the culture after being infamous for making, unknown whiskey. So the new distilleries like Yuza, they started making single malts from in the Scottish way, but paying the homage to their own culture, using their own grains from their own fields, working like unlike any new distilleries that's been happening in Japan. So it's kind of a new trend in the world, I guess, because there's a good way to make the whiskey, as we all know, and we are trying to observe how it's really well done, and we are trying to get all the work to be done in our culture. So we are trying to implement the good way to our culture. That's what we did in India in Goa right now, and it worked pretty good. And we try to be consistent too. So as we tell about our whiskeys, I can tell you about those. We have gone one step further at every new whiskey. So like we increase the alcohol, we change the barrel composition, and we try to keep our quality the same way, but adding a new nuance like sherry barrels, or let's say virgin oak with our new whiskey, which I haven't tried yet, but yeah, let's see.
I find that very interesting because that's it's an element of like thoughtful, I guess, experimentation where it's not just experimentation for experimentation. Like, it's not just throwing things at the wall to see what sticks. It's changing one element about the process, at each go through, which I think is much more of an academic approach to it. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, very cool. You had brought a couple of things that I wanted to delve into a little bit. Two different peat sources coming from Scotland. So does the malting agency in Northern Italy, will they do specifically Northern Scotland peated barley, or do they mix them?
No, so Northern India, the agency is located in Northern India, and we are harvesting our barley actually right now, starting from January 15th to February 15th, a season we call Golden Harvest, that we harvest our barley from three northern regions of India, mainly Rajasthan and two other regions. And then we import the peat from Scotland to India in whole grapes, and we are giving it to them. So it's only like the main point was not to import European barley, just to use Indian barley. And to send the Indian barley to Europe and getting them peat smoke over there and getting them back was the worst idea we can ever do. Right. This is quite a little bit more expensive, but logistic wise, it's a better way to do it.
Sure.
So we import the peat in winter months because we don't actually want to lose the humidity in peat, so that we can do it in a better way. We can get the most out of it, and that's how it goes. The peat comes, and we harvest the barley, and we do our peat production in winter months. And in the later months we do unpeated production.
Cool. Now, but they, in terms of processing of the barley, would they isolate Highland peat and do a run, or isolate Isla peat and do a run, or do the two peat sources get blended together and then used?
So we do peating different separately. We have Highland peated spirit, Isla peated spirit, and because as I just told you, we go another step in our whiskeys. So we start the core line with a whiskey called Brilliance, which is unpeated. Then we go to a lightly peated whiskey, and the way we do it is blending the unpeated and lightly peated whiskey together, and that lightly peated is a blend of two different peat style spirits.
Okay.
Then we go to a heavily Isla peated whiskey. So this is our flagship.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Very important to note and kind of just chime in as well for all of our listeners and kind of viewers who are not necessarily incredibly well versed in the ways of peat and smoke. So peat is essentially really just decomposing plant matter. It is found all across the world. Generally, the regions where these peat bogs and mires, are located is closer to the boreal regions, about 60 to 70 degrees north. You do find some peatlands in southern hemisphere kind of areas as well. Like think like Brazil actually does have some latent peat bogs as well. But for the most part, peatlands are generally found like closer to the poles and farther north as well. Obviously, in India, not a whole lot of boreal forest that would have led to usable peat bogs. Hence why they're going ahead and importing peat from the Highlands of Scotland, as well as the island regions of Scotland, where the peat's going to differ slightly. In the Highlands, it's actually not going to have as much of a phenolic composition as you'll find out on Islay. Hence why our wonderful region of Islay is so well known for making heavily peated whiskeys.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, that's and the follow up to that stuff. Scotland is a 2-row barley kind of a place. 6-row, and you correct all the things that I'm wrong about here.
Sure.
6-row barley grains are less uniform in size than 2-row. Is that true or not true? So if you are running those through a roller mill, do you have issues in terms of grist consistency because of or is it a different type of mill, different type of milling process that you would put 6-row through versus 2? Or is it just still roller mills?
So we start actually. We actually not do a lot of technologically enhanced products, but you're right. The size of the kernels, let's put it that way, 6 kernels, they can be they're not that uniform they're not as perfect as 2-row kernels. But we don't have a lot of problems. We actually do first of all we do mechanical elimination first, because we have to lose everything, and we actually lose some of those really small unused kernels. So that's the first part that we are losing that. But other than that, we don't actually have any problems of processing, having the grist, taking out the husk from the vortex and everything. We are pretty good with that. It's coming out really consistent. But the main problem of the 6-row barley is actually the not the consistency, but the outcome. It gives us less product than 2-row barley. So that's the main problem. So the yield is not high.
Yeah, I was going to ask what the yield would be.
I don't know the exact version, but as far as I remember, it's like 75% of what we can make with 2-row barley. So I have to confirm that with Michael, specialty unit. But what I can tell you is why we are still using it, because it's expensive, it has low yield, and it's actually giving us a better character because it has more proteins than 2-row barley, less carbs, and more enzymes, more amylase, which helps us later during fermentation and esterification. And that will give us a little bit thicker mouthfeel. That's why we are actually using it.
Mm-hmm. And I read that your target ABV in the wash phase is 5%, which is obviously we're shooting for 8 or 9. On the mature whiskey side of things, what do you think aiming for and stopping at a lower wash ABV ends up giving you in the mature whiskey phase? And how are those two things? What's the net result?
So what we want from low wines to spirit at the end, new make spirit, what we want is a clear spirit with all the elegant notes that we want to have, all the fruit esters, because we want our whiskey to be a little bit on the same line with, let's say, just a little bit more Glenmorangie in a different style, if I can compare it to yours for a good understanding. We want a lot of fruits. We want a lot of tropical fruits, honey, because that's our house signature. And to manage that, we have to do some, cuts, and we have to see our low wines and high wines according to that. So we are not finishing at 5. It should be around 5 to 8 as a range.
Okay, in the fermentation phase.
Yeah.
Okay.
So then it's around 8 in general. So we end up with should be 24 with the low wines. Mm-hmm. Then we should be around 63 to 67 in the final product. Generally about 65 lately. Then because the rest of the magic is all up to the casks and the climate. I think that's more magical. But we have a house style that we want, and the good thing is Michael used to be the master blender for our high volume selling drinks, like all the brandies, vodkas, and everything. So he's coming from that background, and he took over Paul John single malt whiskey when it first opened. So he has a wonderful understanding of what he wants. It means of what is like, how he can understand the whiskey in olfactory ways, and how can he taste, and how he taught the other distillers right now at the distillery. So they have the house style, they know it pretty good. If there's any, uncertain things, they don't do that, and they just, take the revise the project if needed, or just they try to consult each other and see what's happening. So we have a wonderful style that's been implemented at the distillery. And all those distillers are working towards it, not by numbers, by tasting it, by smelling it, by reaching a common understanding. So that's creating our style mostly.
Cool.
Koray, do you mind walking us through, the ferment process as well? Are we talking, stainless steel washbacks? Are we talking all wooden? What do the hours look like as well?
Great question, because it's different, of course. So what's happening is we get our product after all the grinding. When it comes to fermentation, we have to do everything in stainless steel, because India, not all India, because India is huge, but Goa is like 90-95 degrees in average through the year, and we are talking about 70 to 80% relative humidity. That might create a lot of contamination in like wooden fermentation tanks. That's why we are not using it, because it has a lot of danger. So we decided to use stainless steel instead of that. However, what we are doing is we are increasing our fermentation time. As you both well know, 40 hours is well enough for a whiskey to ferment, have the fermentation. We are doing 60 plus hours with our fermentation to enhance the fruity aromas a little bit on the further level. That's what we are doing at fermentation part. And then the beer is, by the way, really delicious. If you like your IPA without the hops, you'll love that. It's really creamy and malty. We're talking about, and you can get a lot of tropical fruits, which I love it. Our whiskey can be defined to some extent with tropical fruits like mango and papaya, and it all starts at the fermentation part. Then you continue with the distillation with our double still, copper pot stills. We have 2 sets of that right now. And when we start doing it, we have uprising line arms. We want to increase the reflux at every way that we can with our stills. We have smaller size stills, unlike Glenmorangie. It's a little bit close to our big size, I guess. But then we have the line arms going up, and the first wash still has a reflux ball on it, and which increases the reflux. And we have an outgoing line arm, which is 109 degrees, if I'm not wrong. Then the second spirit still also has a vertical, 90 degrees line arm without a reflux ball, but it's smaller inside. So we get all the help from the copper, and to strip out all the heavier alcohol to create a refined, elegant style of whiskey. And that's how we do it. And then maturation takes care of the rest. We just have to be careful with that.
Yes, I can imagine. And to your point regarding maturation, I think between us we'll have a load of questions about that. But one of the things that I'd read, and again, correct me if I'm wrong here, is that your barrel entry strength is lower than what you'd find typically in Scotland. 55 ABV into the cask, is that right?
No, 63 to 67.
Oh, okay, so you're going in about where we are.
Around 65.
Okay, great. And
the thing is, we don't add water. We don't add any water because
still strength is barrel entry strength then.
Yeah. Okay. That's some of the problems because a lot of distilleries in the world, they have to add some water because they end up with like 72 and they want to get into the barrel in a lower level. So we don't have to do that because our Nemec spirit is at that strength we like, and we can just put it in the barrel. But we end up around 55-ish.
Okay, got it. And you'd mentioned that the still fabricators live in a dry part of the country. are they coppersmiths who made you guys stills, or are they still makers that made you guys stills? I mean, is this how did that work exactly?
To my knowledge, I don't know the exact information, but my guess is they are coppersmiths working on our project.
Right.
Because like most of the production happening in India, they are like industry size, so they have huge column stills. And in our case, I don't think that it was a chance to have steel makers in India.
Right.
But
yeah.
I can also guarantee you, because I'm from Turkey and I needed some small stills for myself to be done. And at that time, we don't have steel makers, but they are making really good stills. I can tell you. So speaking from experience, I think it's the case.
Awesome.
So that still set up ascending line arm out of the wash still, and then basically a horizontal line arm out of the spirit still, from what I gather, into worms or into shell tubes, or what's the condensing?
Shell and tube.
Okay.
It's very interesting, because through this now we're starting to be able to paint like a profile of what's going on in our glass. So we've got 6-row barley that's going to create this beautiful kind of creaminess, a longer fermentation time in a hotter climate that's going to also give you this this almost tropical fruitiness. You've got an ascending line arm that's going to create a little bit more reflux, in addition to a reflux bulb, which is going to help you start to strip away and start refine things. But then you run that right back into worm tubs, which again
shell and tube, not worm tubs.
Shell and tube. Sorry about that. Yeah, and then shell and tubes, which keeps along that trend for a lighter, more floral kind of heart and new make spirit. Which is then ultimately going to go into a mixture of first fill and second fill, primarily, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Beautiful.
So that all of that makes complete sense to me. The part that doesn't is that's a whole different maturation environment in terms of relative humidity, consistency of heat, the structure of your maturation environment. I'd read somewhere that there's some of it that might even be underground or climate controlled or whatever. But that's for me, it's a bit like, okay, well, a cask sitting around in Canada and a cask sitting around in New Zealand and a cask sitting around in India, those are going, or Kentucky, those are going to experience a much different maturation life. What's the maturation environment for your casks? In terms of how much are they exposed to the natural heat and humidity that exists in that environment?
Okay, so maturation is a little bit complex, but before coming that, I just want to add something. We actually cannot use warm tub in India because you have to keep the warm tub condensing water a little bit cold outside of the distillery. That's not possible. So we can continue making rums maybe with that heat.
Right.
Huge issue. Yeah.
Without using any cooling system is technically not possible, but that's the same for our maturation. So we are talking about 90-95 degrees in average of heat and 70-75 in average of relative humidity. Like when I was in India, before the meetings, if I wanted to swim in the swimming pool, the best hour to do that was 8 a.m. in the morning when it first opens, because then you were just a tea bag in the pot. You just dip in. In the day, it's not possible. And since these are the conditions, the evaporation from the barrel, the angel share is quite high through the year. And the first year we are talking about 14%. And then the rest of the years we are talking about an average of 8 to 10 from the barrel to the environment.
Would I be wrong in assuming that the bulk of what's leaving the barrel is alcohol because it's a humid environment? So your proof would be descending in terms of ABV in the barrel?
Unfortunately, yes. Luckily, the time helps us, and we don't lose a lot, so we can have a cask strength. But that's the main problem. So how are you gonna solve that was the main question we had, and they came up with the answer of why don't we use warehouse style warehouses like we use in Kentucky. Why don't we use a higher, deeper warehouses that we can create microclimates so we can have different barrels aging? So what we do is currently we opened the third one, so we have 3 warehouses above the ground level. They're all American rickhouse like warehouses where we don't have a racking system, so they're just staying there. And we call all those barrels maturation barrels. So what we do is we fill first fill and second fill barrels, put them there, leave them for at least 5 years. They are taking their time, they get matured over there, losing all those wonderful alcohol and water from the barrel to the environment. And this is our maturation part. Then we have another warehouse, which is the underground cellar. It's a special cellar that we can actually control the aging a little bit more than the over the ground part. The reason for that is this under our visitor center, it's buried under concrete. So concrete helps you regulating the temperature a little bit. I was still sweating there. Don't get me wrong. It's not that cool. It's a little bit less in temperature. It's a little bit less in humidity. And there you can control the loss of alcohol a little bit more. So what we do is we put our Oloroso PX, Portuguese wine cask, rum barrels, or all the precious barrels, virginal, and a lot of first fill bourbon barrels. And then since Michael used to be a master blender and he does it very well, he actually creates wonderful blends from those barrels. So that's how we do it. And we have different levels of making the whiskey. Let's say our flagship Brilliance Edited and Bold, which is unpeated, lightly peated, and heavily peated. They are coming from first and second fill bourbon barrels. Then we have cask strength whiskeys, which we call the select casks. And they're classic, which is unpeated, peated, which is heavily peated with Highland peat mostly. Then we have our new whiskeys, Oloroso and PX, in the same line too. So with the first 2, classic and peated, we only use first fill bourbon barrels coming from the underground cellar. So we have all that intense flavors that we want in our whiskeys. And they're considerably older than if we did it from the higher ground. Then what we do with the Oloroso and PX is we also use the Oloroso and PX casks that we have in the underground cellar to be blended with the first fill and first fill bourbon barrels that's in the underground cellar. So that's another line for us. And then we have special releases like Christmas edition, where we have different types of finishing or blending, which we use Oloroso PX. This year we use virgin oak. Next year we can use different barrels like Portuguese barrels. We don't know that yet, but we also have them from the from the underground cellar. So our limited editions, they are generally coming from the underground cellar, and our flagship editions are coming from the rickhouse cellars. But what we also have is this guy, Nirvana, which is our entry-level whiskey. We started to sell this in the States this year. It's a whiskey that's made from the barrels, which are second fill and third fill bourbon barrels. And they're all coming from the rickhouse warehouses. And that's a fantastic whiskey because we can take the advantage of that and just share. And it's only a 3-year-old whiskey, and I think Cameron has some or had some before. And
yep, just looking for the bottle. It's around somewhere.
It creates just a fantastic drinking experience for a 3-year-old, which you cannot experience in Scotland. So we can actually use that.
Is that bottled at 46 ABV, or is that bottled at a lower ABV than the other?
This is bottled at 40.
40, okay.
Our bottles are generally bottled at 46 when it's flagship. Then we have cask strength 55, 55.2. These guys are 48. And we also have a new whiskey that I even didn't taste yet. It's created for the French market. It's called Pondicherry. That's our only 43% whiskey.
Okay.
And as we came there just to say that, we don't chill filter anything other than Nirvana because it's 40%. And we use natural coloring. There's no color added into the whiskeys.
Even on Nirvana, no color added as well?
Sorry? Nirvana, yeah, no color. Nirvana is pretty light anyway. Yeah. That.
Is the Nirvana style? I mean, I guess, the knee-jerk reaction from my perspective, I tend to drink my whiskeys neat, but from time to time, there are some really fascinating cocktails that can be produced from, Glenmorangie, from Ardbeg, from other single malt Scotch whiskies. Do you find, that Cam and I, you face, at least some, not as consistent as it used to be, but some pushback in terms of using our stuff in single malts, not only from a purist's point of view, but from a cost of goods point of view. With Nirvana, does that open a new set of doors for you in terms of usage opportunities?
So first of all, I have to say that I met Cam when he was making cocktails with Glenmorangie, I guess. So he makes fantastic cocktails. I love that guy. When it comes to Nirvana, we actually created Nirvana with a great inquiry. So our regional manager in France came out, contacted the distillery, like what we need in France, because France is the highest single malt selling country of the world, but they mostly buy single malts, lighter, younger, and a little bit on the lower alcohol point, and also unpeated, and the most importantly under 30 euros. So Nirvana is our answer to that. It's 3 to 5 year old whiskey. It's light. It's not peated. And it's at 40% ABV, and it's under 30 euros. So that was the main thing that made us create Nirvana. And it came out to be a wonderful whiskey. So we decided to bring it to other countries, like States. We brought it in March, and we sold it. We sold all of our inventory as of now.
Wow, that's great.
And we were out of stock in December, and that's incredible. And we didn't imagine that, because my main drive for that was, okay, this year we can actually use that in cocktails, and then COVID happened. Like, what the hell? And
right.
When COVID happens, if you bring the product in March, you cannot put it in the chains or whatsoever. Like that's impossible. And it was enough to see our product being depleted, which is an incredible thing to happen. And yes, we were imagining to have a lot of existence in the cocktail scene, and COVID didn't make it happen as much as we wanted. But I can tell you, like, we had a lot of good accounts that make Nirvana cocktails and put it into ready to go boxes, ready as cocktails.
Sure.
Yeah, like that worked pretty good. And yes, that was one of the points. That was one of the things we wanted to happen, because the rest of our whiskeys, starting from 46%, are not that favorable for accounts, bars to be using in the cocktails. It's just making it expensive. I was talking to a Turkish podcast a week ago, and they asked me, like, how do you like your cocktails? Like, can single malts be used in cocktails? I was like, yes, single malts can be a wonderful cocktail base, and they can create a lot of good cocktails. I love them. However, is it worth the price that we are spending the money? Can we find a little bit more affordable options? So that's actually a driving question for a lot of cocktail consumers and bar professionals that are making the cocktail. Nirvana was our answer, which was a pretty good one. Hopefully it will get better after everything settles down, after we get all our vaccines and stuff, I guess.
Right. Yes, exactly.
I think the story of Nirvana, I had no idea that part of the formation of this whiskey was a kind of a call to action coming from a market. And I think that's a great example of how whiskey, even though it may represent one specific place or one specific time or one specific point on a map, it's influenced by the world, right? Scotch whiskey wouldn't be Scotch whiskey if it wasn't for the markets around the world that were consuming it, the calls to actions to create different nuances that are going to be palatable and attractive to people in different markets and regions. So that story of Nirvana is an amazing example of how, yes, Paul John, it encapsulates in totality, the place that is Goa, but that story is communicated to consumers that could be all around the world, and it needs to be able to speak the same language that they do as well.
I honestly love small stories like this. Like, we actually have, right now we have a lot of US exclusives without any stories back. And okay, that's the US exclusive, but what's the story? Why is it for US? Like, you guys have the Cat Ball, which is, I think, really clearly made for US palates. I love it. And on Ardbeg, you had the black this year, which is influenced by a New Zealand background, which I really love that. And creating stories like that, it actually makes whiskey, first of all, easier to sell, which is the main drive. Second of all, easier to back it up. Like when I tell the story about Nirvana, or like our new whiskey Pondicherry has also some background. And why not create a new whiskey for USA in the future? Because USA is a good market right now. Or why not, let's say, Ardbeg create something new for French market? I think this is creating it, because whiskey for me is nature, culture, and time working together to create an art. So that's what I look at most of the time, and I think that's what we are trying to do in Paul John too, because we have a wonderful background of Indian culture, Portuguese culture, Commonwealth culture coming together, driven with the need and love for the spirit itself. Because, by the way, like if you ever go to India, the drinking life for you will be changing forever. They drink incredible, like their drinking habits are incredible. But all those cultures bring in the game we love. That's why I quit being an engineer and started being a whiskey professional. That drove me to be one, and that's what I like. And I think that makes me back Nirvana up really in a passionate way.
Love that. That's fantastic.
Also, we have another story that you possibly not know because you went to Washington before everything happened. So our new bottles, like this is the packaging, and we are talking about stories about it. What can you think about it? Any ideas? What's this packaging about?
From what I can tell, it looks like either torn paper or a sort of a roughly rendered, hand painted kind of a thing.
So what we have is Paul John Oloroso. These are Indian for Sanskrit for the Oloroso itself. Right.
Oh, nice, cool.
But the main, I didn't know it until the branding told it to me. The golden color represents India, and the reddish color represents Spain, because we are actually sourcing our barrels from Spain, and which we actually bring a new breath into the game. I can tell you about that later. So this is like a combination of two cultures coming together and creating this incredible whiskey, Oloroso. And we had this idea of using Oloroso and PX cask in the past. And when you go to Jerez right now, if you are not a joint company, you cannot easily find the barrels you want to use. So we can share barrels. So what we did was we actually said, let's don't use Jerez. Let's go to Andalusia. And we started working with a bodega there, and which actually sourced us historical casks. That's what we call Oloroso and PX casks of 60 years of age that we can profit from a lot. So we didn't use the Jerez part, but we use Andalusian cask. That's what we were not calling sherry, but we are calling it Oloroso and PX only. And that brings a new story to us. And now we are not alone. There are other distilleries in UK doing the same thing. And it's developing. These are stories that will develop the whiskey world. And as the regulations are not, let's say, exceeded by our expectations.
So those casks would have been actual process casks as opposed to seasoned casks. They would have been part of the process of creating those fortified wines, Andalusian fortified wines, and then those were extracted from the process, sold to folks like Paul John. So the thought being that the wood itself may be a little bit tired because of the number of uses, but the saturation would be aggressive. I'm guessing. So is that from as a couple of just follow-up questions? I know that we, on the Scottish side of things, quickly processing the sweeter that the previous occupant was, the more quickly that cask needs to be processed before it sours. So you're sending an XPX cask to India. there's got to be some expedited something about that before the cask goes bad on
everything about expedited when it comes to that part.
Get it here now.
Yeah.
One of the problems we are having is technically sending in and out of barrels because there are regulations, especially India has strict regulations when it comes to importing barrels because of humidification and everything else, contamination. You cannot allow that. So we are trying to be as efficient as possible. With the bourbon barrels, we generally don't have that problem because we do it in bulk and we are partly supported by Setswork too right now. So I don't think we are having a problem. But with these casks, special casks, we do have a problem. And it's not the only problem. Humidity is another problem.
So sure.
We cannot disassemble anything. They have to come to India intact. Yeah.
Yeah, they would just swell up and never get them back together.
500 liters of a cask coming coming to India is huge. The problem is the humidity is so high that the staves start to swell, and we don't want that. So we want to keep everything in touch. We, of course, when it comes to the site, we just take precautionary elements. We just clean it if needed, and then reuse it. But yeah, the importing of barrels is a really big problem for everybody in India, because if you are talking about Rampur, we are going to the north and it has different climate conditions, and if you are talking about Amrut, they are also in a drier and hotter place, so it's creating a lot of problems for everyone.
Sure.
To be careful about it. And another thing we are doing is with the casks, since we are talking about it, we also have a winery now.
Nice.
Not now. We had a winery that we were making wines, Indian wines, and we created a brandy, Indian grape.
Nice.
Let me.
Very cool.
So we created Excel.
Beautiful.
Okay.
This guy.
Oh, right on. Yeah.
Like an Indian grown grape brandy. What we did was we brought Uni Blanc to India and we sow it to the soil, that winery, and we harvested those. And we also have a local grape called the Bangalore Purple. So we use those grapes and we distill them in our whiskey stills, and we age them in French Limousin oak casks, and for 8 to 10 years. And now we are releasing it in the States too. That's been a fantastic one, I can tell. That's another dangerous battle, like we are talking about Malaga 12. It's like another version of that. I should send you some. It's just an incredible one. But yeah, we are trying a lot of different barrels. Yeah.
And is it safe to say that that the brandy is matured in the underground element?
Yes,
if it's going to be that long, yeah. Wow. That I need to try that as soon as possible. It sounds completely fascinating. Wow. Yeah. One of the things in Cameron, you can relate to this even more than I can. Islay whiskeys can sometimes, from the consumer perspective or even from the decision maker perspective, be pigeonholed as, well, I've had one. Why do I need another one? I'm projecting now, but I'm guessing one of the things that you experience in terms of marketing Indian whiskey is that they're all Indian whiskey. That there's, and you just mentioned that Amrut's produced in a drier and hotter part of India, so of course there's going to be differences that happen as a result of that. But do you run into that, and how do you address those kinds of homogenization concerns?
So the first question I often received when I first started the job was, "Oh, do they make whiskey in India?" I was like, "Oh my God, we have a long way to go." So
yes,
that was the first thing. So when I got through that obstacle, then we have the question of how they make the single malt, or is there another one? So me coming from a background of Whiskey Monster or whatever, that whiskey blogging background actually helps me a lot. So I do have a better understanding of the market of all the spirits. So I do have an answer for that. Like, do you need another Islay whiskey? Yes, you do. Do you need another Indian whiskey? Yes, you hell do. Like, we are only 3 single malts. I think now the 4th just opened. from India, and India is a huge country. We don't know a lot about it, but there are different backgrounds that you can use. There's different climatic conditions that you can do, and if you ask me, like, do we need another Taiwanese whiskey? Yes, we do. Like we need another Japanese whiskey, but the thing is, these whiskeys should be made in a good and honest way, and in the best possible, production level that they can achieve. So yes, we need another Indian whiskey. If you ask me, we need a lot of Indian whiskey because, as I told you, Indian whiskeys are the best-selling whiskeys of the world. Right. But what I would do is actually I would try to increase the quality of those Indian whiskeys that are the best whiskeys, because we're talking about whiskey that are selling 100 millions of bottles.
Right.
And we actually have two is Officer's Choice, and we actually have it in the States. In Total Wine, you can find it, but these are not the original ones. This is like grain neutral spirits and Scotch whiskey with color edit, if you can see it.
Oh wow! Okay. Wow, I didn't realize that. I mean, until a few years ago, I wasn't really. I knew that it existed, but I didn't get the scale of it until the last few years, where it's like, that's an enormous number of bottles being sold annually of that particular product. It's insane.
But also, let's be honest, like, it pays the bills.
Great. Exactly right.
Distilleries. So as with distilleries, pay the bill with these bottlings, they can make single malts. That's how it happened with Amrut, how it happened with us, how it happened with Rampur too. So they are creating those whiskeys. Now they are creating higher end products. And like, we started with 5 whiskeys. Like, when I first started the job in late 2018, I only had 5 SKUs here. Now I have 12 in just a span of 2 years. And hopefully this year will be the pause of that for a while, so we can enjoy those 2
and the brandy, like, why didn't throw brandy?
That's included. But during the years, Indian whiskey got a lot of reputation too. Two of our limited edition whiskeys, Kanya, it was selected the best Asian whiskey. Now Mituna, which is coming next month, was selected the 3rd finest whiskey of the world. In the last year, we got a lot of them, like San Francisco gold medals from other competitions, which is quite a good sign for how Indian whiskey is evolving. Same with other brands like Rampur and Amrut. They're also receiving a lot of reputation and understanding in the culture. But I think what we need to pass, especially in the US, because in UK we have a better understanding market, since the bourbon market is not that dominant, and everybody knows they are single malt and blended whiskeys to some extent. In US, we have the bourbon market as a whole. Then we have single malt and blended market, and the single malt market, and then comes the world whiskey, which is like a 4th, 5th tier. So that's the part we have a lot of obstacles about, and that's the part I have been trying to solve during my time with Paul John. And I think we have come a long, long way. And thanks to all people in the industry, all the consumers, and people like you, which have been, very understanding about, very interested about how we do things in India. And I remember that on the first days of COVID in March, Cameron was at my place. We recorded a video on YouTube. And it was the first day, like, they were closing the main areas of the building, and we were like, okay, I think we have to do this in the house, if you don't mind. And then we did it. And, these relationships actually make a lot of whiskeys to be heard in a louder way. That's what I think. And that's happening with all parts of the industry.
Yeah, I think, all of this stuff ends up being communications message that's based on people and places, and the diversity of cultures and physical environments and production techniques that defines world whiskey is infinitely fascinating. And to capture that in a bottle, one of the things that that Amrut and Paul John have done really well is to launch a subcategory of world whiskey with really, really good liquid in a short period of time. Been able to get national and world awards, ratings, really, really high level ratings, some, best whiskey in the world stuff, kind of out of the gate. I mean, 10 years isn't exactly out of the gate, but Glenmorangie has been around for 179 years. So, I mean, it's like you've carved a path quickly that raises the level, not just of awareness, but of perceived quality of a subcategory of world whiskey that people are still just kind of going, wait a minute, Indian single malt. Oh, and it's really damn good. That part, I think, kudos to you guys. You've done really amazing work in that regard. The packaging and the branding is obviously terrific, very eye-catching, and the reputation that you've garnered, around the world is really, really to be envied. I'm fascinated by it. And when we had, when we did the event, we were all on that on the Douglas Smith event.
Yeah.
It's like, oh damn it, we got to talk about Indian whiskey. This is some fascinating stuff.
Dan, that's such a great point. Because you look at the route to market for brands that are built domestically here in the U.S. and without alienating our whiskey, our brothers and sisters who are American whiskey drinkers, bourbon drinkers.
Sure.
Oftentimes the route to market for fledgling and young bourbon brands is to source whiskey, right? Which doesn't necessarily give them a lot of control over the experimentation that we aforementioned, over the ultimately the direction of the brand. Whereas you look at brands like Paul John and Amrut, the way that they've come to market has not only been splashy and effective, but then also it's allowed them to produce whiskeys that are right off of the bat, incredibly, incredibly well made, but then also allows them to have their finger on the pulse to be able to drive it in the direction that it needs to go, so that you can go from, opening with 5 whiskeys to having 12 in the course of 2 years. I think that's something incredible.
And you've got a guy like Michael who can come from already a highly defined distilling background, jump into this role and start making really good stuff right out there. There really isn't a learning curve, and you've already taken the control of the means of production over, so that you're not having to transition out of a sourced brand into your own, with trying to maintain some consistency, trying to find a distiller as well that they're doing, trying to find 7 figures of financing to make it happen out of kind of nowhere. You've done this sort of, you reverse engineered that in a way that I think informs the brand and really puts it at a massive, as has played out, a massive advantage over a competition over the course of the 10 years of its existence.
Also, let's don't forget that, we didn't do rocket science. We are actually following the path that Scotch brands and Irish brands and that open to us. We are let's talk about this clearly, and because we didn't we didn't invent cask finishing, and Glenmorangie being one of the leaders of the industry. That was a nice way to say it. Or we didn't create making peated whiskeys or Lafroy, Ardbeg, the historical Lagavulin, and everything came together to show us a way, to give us a guidance. That's what we did, and that's what everybody is doing. And maybe Paul John, or maybe it is already, will be a guide for another Asian whiskey, another world whiskey to follow the roots. So that's how we could actually make things happen in 10 years, which is a short time for distillery, if you ask me.
Truly.
But we are using our geographic advantage about that. But if it wasn't for any whiskey brands which did a single small thing in the past, everything has been beneficial for us. And that's what I'm telling you about culture. This is the culture of distillation. This is the culture of, at the same time, marketing with all the branding and packaging around. I
think that's something that the process of maturation and the industry have in common, where it's not necessarily all about what you extract and what you take out, but also what you put back into the culture as well. So there's
absolutely
something beautiful about that.
And I do think that there's going to be a lot of that in the US too, with bourbon and single malt culture, not the bourbon, but single malt culture being, defended and currently promoted in a good way in the US. I hope that it will be a path to all the US producers too. And now they are doing a lot of bourbon barrel finishing too. Like that's an interesting part. And we're also doing an ex-bourbon finishing right now. Our new barrel is aged in virgin oak, then finished in ex-bourbon barrel. So that will be a different thing for us.
Yeah.
This is all about interactions.
Turns it on its head. Yeah. That's fantastic. I can't wait to try that stuff. We've kept you out past the hour that we promised, and we can't thank you enough for the insights. This has been as fascinating as I knew it would be. And I need to go buy a whole lot more Indian single malt, clearly, because I don't own nearly enough. But thank you, Cam. If you got any final words that you wanted to, or any questions that you wanted to float past Koray, feel free. Short of that, thank you, obviously, both for for sharing the screen with me. And Cam, as always, it's a pleasure working with you. Koray, we'll hopefully see you at some point physically in human form, and looking forward to those days whenever they come back. But in the interim, cheers to you. Thanks for sharing your afternoon with us, and we wish you nothing but the best.
This was a great breakfast for me. I love it. Thank you very much, gentlemen. I miss both of you. Hope to see you very soon to enjoy and nerd more.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, guys. Cheers. Cheers to you. Cheers.